We are excited now to move to a very important panel. I want to call them up to take their seats, and we'll introduce them. New Hampshire Rebellion is part of a large movement, as you all know, and we are just one small piece of what has truly become a national movement. And we are honored that national organizations, 10 groups whose logos you see on the banner behind me, have partnered with us and have been leading this fight in other parts of the country for many years. And we're very honored that leaders of these organizations have flown in from Washington and other parts of the country to be here to speak about how the national movement is moving far beyond New Hampshire and some of the exciting developments in other places. Also, to kick off this next panel, we will have the unveiling of a very exciting report, which is being released to media, will be made available nationally on Monday, but we'll get a preview of it here presented by the Senior Vice President of Common Cause, Karen. And we hope that you will help to spread the word as you get this information. Once again, I'd be remiss if I don't remind you, please magnify our voice by tweeting and posting #FightBigMoney at NH Rebellion. And you can see all the other organizations that are with us. You can just do at their name and you will come up with them. So please get this word out. We're going to begin with a short video which outlines, if we have video, we're going to try to cue that up for later. So we're going to start with a presentation of the report, but first, the moderator. Many of you know this man. He is, I would say, the godfather of campaign reform in New Hampshire. May I say that, John?
You can say whatever you want, and I can disagree with you.
John can disagree. John Rauh was a candidate for the United States Senate in the late 80s, early 90s, came within a whisker of defeating Judd Gregg, ran on this issue, limiting himself to small donations. I think the motto was Rauh for Senate, not for sale. John has been a mentor to me and founder of Americans for Campaign Reform, with whom I worked. And Americans for Campaign Reform, a few years ago, merged to form Issue One, one of the national leaders. And John is the chairman emeritus of Issue One. Long before doing this work, John was a leader in the independent party movement in Cincinnati, Ohio, was a business leader, and has devoted truly his full measure of devotion to this cause over many years. John Rauh, kick off the panel.
Thank you, Dan, and welcome all to the most important cause America is facing today, and that is the need to reform the way we finance elections. I want to compliment Dan and his whole team at New Hampshire Rebellion. I think they have done an amazing job of bringing great attention to this important cause, not just through New Hampshire, but across America. And the quizzing of can you hear? Is the mic on? Yes. The quizzing of candidates on their positions on campaign finance reform has led to real success as we see a number of candidates coming forward with strong commitments to reform this system. The momentum behind campaign finance reform has never been greater, as the panelists will point out to you. The public wants reform. Let's just take a look at the New York Times poll of about 2.5 months ago. Across America, plus or minus 4%, 49% of Americans want the campaign finance system at the federal level rebuilt, and 39%, an additive 39% want to change. That's 85% want it changed or rebuilt. We've got momentum, we've got movement. The panelists will go through some of the terrific successes they've accomplished in the last 18 to 24 months. The procedure is we'll have opening statements and comments from the 4 panelists, and then we'll go to you and open it for discussion. But to lead it off, let me introduce first, and I'm going to introduce all of the panelists now. Karen Hobert-Flynn will introduce an exciting new report. Karen has been with Common Cause for over 2 decades. She's currently Senior Vice President for Strategy and Programs. She was a key leader of the 2000 campaign in Connecticut that led to enactment of an excellent system of public funding of elections for that state, the 3rd state in America to do it. Frankly, Karen, the reform community is blessed to have you as one of our outstanding leaders, and thank you for that. Jeff Clements co-founded Free Speech for People, a national nonpartisan campaign organization to overturn Citizens United. He currently chairs the board of Free Speech for People. Jeff has served as Assistant Attorney General and Chief of the Public Protection Bureau in the Massachusetts Attorney General's Office. Jeff was also co-founder of Friends of the Casco Bay, a bay just a bit north of us here. Casco Bay, Friends of the Casco Bay, he co-founded an environmental organization centered on protecting Maine's Casco Bay. Third, Mansur Gidfar is Communications Director for Represent Us, a nonpartisan national campaign organization that's fighting to combat the undue influence of special interests in American government. Mansur has previously worked as deputy editor and contributor for the viral media site Upworthy, which is one of the fastest growing media companies of all time. And fourth, and not last, is Nick Nyhart, President and CEO of EverVoice. Nick led the Northeast Action Project that laid the groundwork for Maine's 1996 breakthrough victory for public financing. In 1997, he joined, that was in 1997 when he led that effort that led to the movement in Maine. He joined other money and politics advocates in 1997 to found Public Campaign, which later became Every Voice Center. Nick has worked to win cutting-edge state reforms and has organized a number of innovative national collaborations to promote public financed elections at the federal level. Nick, when the history book is written, and it will be written, and it will be a book of history about success, when the history book of our nation's path to real campaign finance reform is written, Nick Nyhart will be recognized as one of the outstanding leaders of this movement. So let's start off, Karen. Let's start off with this exciting new report that you're about to unveil.
Thank you, John. And I want to thank Jan Weeks and the staff of New Hampshire Rebellion and the many groups and people who worked so hard to pull together this very important convention, We the People Convention, to talk about what's at stake in this election, and more importantly, what's at stake with our democracy. I also want to say that I had the opportunity to know and work with Granny D over the years, both as she made her trek across the country, and also she came and lent her voice many times to Connecticut when we were working to pass public financing for legislative races and statewide races, the first state to do that legislatively. And it was a real privilege to be able to work with her. For those of you that don't know Common Cause, we're a nonpartisan grassroots organization dedicated to upholding the core values of American democracy. We work to create open, honest, and transparent government that serves the public interest. We work on a wide range of issues: voting rights, money in politics, districting issues, and other impediments, structural impediments in our democracy that prevent us from broadening participation in our democracy. I'm really pleased to share with you this report, Our Voices, Our Democracies, that we worked on with a broad range of groups at the national level. We're releasing it today for the first time, that talks about victories since Citizens United and the road ahead, empowering voters over special interests. It was co-authored by Common Cause, Center for Media and Democracy, Demos, Every Voice, People for the American Way, Public Citizen, and U.S. PIRG, and we also consulted with many groups that are moving reforms at the state level so that we got the best information possible. For the first time, we put together in one concise report evidence of victories that have really gone unnoticed, resulting from organizing that has been underestimated at every step of the way, and the emergence of a national movement that has all been dismissed as fiction by the Beltway media. And it's been built from the grassroots up. It documents a state-by-state strategy that has racked up more impressive wins than even you might be aware of. And that's why we wanted to share this with you and the public today. As matters of public policy, these are wins that span the spectrum, from transparency to efforts to call on Congress to overturn Citizens United, and also moving small donor public financing programs and anti-corruption measures in jurisdictions across the country. And by themselves, they have not come close to overturning Citizens United, but actually we have made remarkable progress in this march in the last 6 years. First, we want to look at the national level, and in the report we talk about how the national conversation on money and politics has been significantly elevated in the last year. You can even see it with the President Obama in his State of the Union speech, where he talked about that he had to acknowledge his regret at his inaction on moving democracy reforms at the federal level due to the partisan gridlock. Citing the many challenges that our democracy faces, he called on the nation to a better politics and pledged to travel around the country in support of democracy reforms throughout his last year of his presidency. And it looks like this is going to be one of the last major pushes of his administration. And as a matter of fact, he is speaking in Springfield, Illinois next week, the site of where he declared that he was going to run for president. And we believe that we will be hearing from him about important democracy reforms. So we've also seen national groups come together in a way they haven't before. 155 groups signed unity principles to outline not just their narrow issue, if they work on public financing and overturning Citizens United, but the broad expanse of reforms that we need to move and push back against big money. And that has also translated into a Fight Big Money agenda, where many national groups are pushing presidential candidates to talk about these principles, not just the problem, but what solutions will they enact, and what kind of pathway will they create, if elected, to move those reforms. It's not enough to talk about the problem, and we've been seeing candidates respond and talk about solutions that they would do if they were elected. We're also seeing expanded ability to move in the state map many reforms, and ballot initiatives are cropping up all over the country. We've seen a record number of ballot initiatives on money and politics that will be coming up in 2016, possibly in California, Missouri, Oregon, South Dakota, and Washington State, along with a number of ballot initiatives at the municipal level, as Americans grow tired of citizens waiting for Congress to act and want to move to the people directly. We also see a number of measures that are going to be pushed through state legislatures, which have come into session in January and are moving reforms. And we're seeing some of those reforms also with bipartisan support, which debunks the myth that this is an issue that just Democrats like. We also are seeing, besides the major alignment around principles and the Fight Big Money agenda, many groups are coming together to plan a number of actions this spring, with large-scale demonstrations known as Democracy Spring and a Democracy Awakening by Avaz and 99 Rise and the NAACP and the Democracy Initiative and others. The other thing is, this report outlines the many strong reforms that we've enacted since Citizens United. We've seen municipalities and states take up citizen-funded elections or small donor public financing, and you'll hear more about this on the panel in detail. But in 2015, voters in Maine strengthened their public financing system, while Seattle voters approved a first-in-the-country democracy voucher program to empower small donors. In February of 2015 in Chicago, there was a ballot resolution urging the City Council to enact small donor public financing. In 2014, voters in Tallahassee approved a bipartisan referendum that included strict campaign contribution limits, ethics reform, and provided each voter with a tax rebate up to $25 for contributions to political campaigns. And in Montgomery County, they passed a small donor public financing measure a year ago and are trying to move forward in Howard County. We've also seen disclosure measures since 2010, when Citizens United opened the floodgates for spending and from entities that never had to disclose before. So at least 23 states have moved strong disclosure reform so that we can uncover who is behind some of the spending that we've seen on the outside. And then millions of people have called to overturn Citizens United. More than 5 million people have signed petitions, and we've seen 16 states and more than 680 cities move resolutions to call on Congress to overturn Citizens United. And we expect to see many other states, possibly California, Washington State, New York State, to move forward this year as well. We've learned that these reforms are popular, and you'll hear some of our panelists talk about this. When they're enacted, they can open the door to policies and to candidates that people wouldn't expect. So in Connecticut, where I've been very active, but many others have, we see strong support. Nearly 80% of citizens support the reform. It has opened the door to women and minority candidates that didn't have the resources to run. And we also see a policy impact from this. And in other jurisdictions that have public financing, where we've seen reforms in environmental protection, food safety, paid sick leave move when they couldn't move before public financing was enacted. We also are seeing bipartisan and diverse coalitions coming together around reform. We have groups like Take Back Our Republic and Issue One, which are organizing conservatives and Republicans across the country around a broad range of reform efforts. And then the Democracy Initiative, which is trying to engage citizen groups with memberships that work on environmental issues, women's issues, and others to talk about the fact that they can't move reform on their issues unless we solve this problem of money in politics. So I hope that you will take an opportunity to look at this report. It is available at commoncause.org/our voices. We also have copies of the report for reporters and others in the back. And our panelists will go through in more detail some of these issues and some of the opportunities that are moving in 2016. So thank you.
Yep, you're on.
All right. Thanks, John. Thanks, Karen, for that great report from around the country, and thanks to all of you for being here today. I was here a little bit, not nearly as much as all the walkers in the rebellion, but I was here on part of the walk last winter. And I can tell you a heated tent is a lot better than the accommodations we had last year, but the energy is the same. I think we are on a mission here, all of us together, and it's really fantastic to be here with you as this spreads not only around New Hampshire, but all over the country. I'm Jeff Clements. I'm, as John mentioned, Chair of Free Speech for People and President as well of American Promise. And I'm here to talk about why we must have the 28th Amendment to the United States Constitution, why we must have it now, and why we will have it because we're already so far along on our way. And if we all step up and do what I think we want to do in this country as Americans who believe in the American promise, we will win the 28th Amendment and a whole host of reform before the end of this decade. So let me start with at the top. I only have a few minutes. I do want to say, I think we know what a healthy democracy looks like, and it looks like what many of the things Karen mentioned and we all work so hard on and believe in, which is transparency, small donor or public-funded elections, anti-corruption acts, state, federal, local. Americans, by and large, know what American democracy should look like. So why do we need a constitutional amendment? Well, let me spend the rest of my time on that. Number one, it's the foundation. We open, as you know, in the Constitution with "we the people." That's what this country is about. It goes back. I'm from Concord, Massachusetts. The North Bridge is right up the road. It started. I say it started there. I know there's debate about where the revolution started, but since the beginning of this country, we've been built on ideas, on beliefs, not on policies, not on particular goals, but actually on fundamental core beliefs. Human liberty, that we are equal citizens, and that we are responsible for self-government. There's nobody else. There's no king, right? There's no corporation. There's no billionaire. There's not even a president, no matter how good they might be, who can save us. Each of us is responsible. Equal citizenship, human liberty, our responsibility for government. That's what this is about. Now, here's the problem, folks. Citizens United, the case before, Buckley, the cases that came after, don't actually believe in those principles. And I'm not exaggerating. As Bruce said, equal citizenship is what we don't have right now. And the Citizens United Supreme Court says that's just fine. I'm not kidding. The argument raised by lawyers in the McCutcheon case, which struck down mechanisms to make public funding of elections stronger in Arizona and Maine, the winning argument was that our laws they're not allowed to be based on trying to end the disparities that prevent some people from exercising their First Amendment and political rights. Literally, the argument that won is if some people can't participate, too bad, because money has a primary place in our elections under our current constitutional regime. Now, we all know that's not what our Constitution's about. There's nothing wrong with the First Amendment. We don't need to amend the First Amendment. We need to win the argument in the Supreme Court that's been going back and forth for 40 years now about the role of money and corporations in our national life. And the way we win that argument is the 28th Amendment. That's why we need it. So the amendment, somebody shouted out, what does it say? Check out the Democracy for All Amendment. You can read it. It's on freespeechforpeople.org. And it says that in order to defend and protect the political equality of every American, and in order to protect the integrity and prevent the corruption of our election and governing process, Congress and the states may limit the spending and contributions of money in our elections, state and federal. And then Section 2 says, and in doing so, we can distinguish between human beings and corporations. And so that's what it says. Now, point number 2, quickly, we must do it now. All right? Don't think and don't let anyone tell you the amendment is some far-off thing and let's do little things first or even big things first. We have to do everything, folks. That's the beauty of our time in history, actually. It's going to be historic. The history books are going to be written, and we're going to do everything. And like 7 times before in our history, we're going to overturn the Supreme Court with a constitutional amendment as part of this. And it's happening. And the reason we have to do it now is because it's the foundation. All of our reforms are built on constitutional foundation. We need the foundation of equal citizenship. We need the foundation of human liberty. And we need the foundation of our own responsibility to govern ourselves. So that's why we have to do it now and not say, oh, well, someone else will do that in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years. We will do it now. And that brings me to my third point, which is we are capable of this. And we are responsible for this. And we are winning this right now. We are winning this amendment. Let me tell you where we are. As Karen mentioned, 16 states have passed resolutions demanding the 28th Amendment. 700 cities and towns. Now, that doesn't just happen. The reason it's happening is because millions of Americans across the political spectrum, 80% of Republicans support the 28th Amendment, 83% of Democrats, 80% of independents. Americans want this to happen, and that's why we are winning. In Montana and Colorado, 2 of the 16 states that passed resolutions, they did it by ballot initiative. And the ballot initiatives both passed almost identical margins, 75% to 25%. Mitt Romney won Montana by 10 points on the same day. Those same Montana voters passed 75-25. So it's happening now. Let's make New Hampshire the 17th state. There's going to be California and Washington State are next up for ballot initiatives. And you can do this right in your hometown. town, you can connect with people across the country, and we can execute the game plan to win the 28th Amendment, restore our constitutional foundation within the next few years. Check out Ben Gubitz over there at AmericanPromise.net. And this is volunteer, this is grassroots, and we have one of our volunteer leaders who's doing this locally, Sandy Milano, here today. So thank you, Sandy. Go talk to her to find out more. Thanks a lot, folks.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you very much. Good, you're up. Great.
Howdy. Is that working? All right. So first of all, I just want to give a big thanks to New Hampshire Rebellion for putting on this great event, and to all the marchers for, slogging through the cold for our freedoms. We salute you. So I want to start this by saying that, when we talk about the bad guy, the big villain, in my mind, it's not any one politician or party or the evil Koch brothers even. Our enemy, I think, is cynicism. And I think our enemy is this idea that a lot of people seem to have, that there is absolutely nothing that can be done to fix this problem. And that's why it's so encouraging to see this amazing coalition of groups and of citizens has emerged to fight for this and for the huge array of solutions that we all have at our disposal. So I'm going to talk about one piece of that right now, which is the state and local ballot initiative route, which so many great groups have been fighting for, and we've already seen it pay off in places like Maine and Seattle and Tallahassee. And what's really exciting about the ballot initiative process is that it allows regular people, just by getting organized, to go around legislatures and politicians who may be captured by special interests, are not particularly interested in moving forward with a reform that would dismantle the system that helped them get into power. That's a question we get all the time, is how on earth are we supposed to get politicians to pass tough rules on themselves? And the question is, well, we don't. We go around them. And just by getting enough signatures, we can put these great reforms directly on the ballot and let the people have a vote. And as we've seen time and time again, when people are given the opportunity to vote for reform, they absolutely do. And I think this is a really important piece of the movement for two reasons. One, it's good policy. A lot of times the money in politics situation is actually worse at the state and local level than it is at the federal level. In many states, it's legal for corporations to give money directly to candidates, which is not legal at the federal level. And I think that a lot of the laws, especially with the gridlock in Washington, a lot of the laws that are most directly affecting people's lives are happening in state legislatures, in city councils. So it's really, really important that as we're building out this movement, we really put an emphasis on state and local politics. And then as a matter of political strategy, I think the more victories we get, the more excitement we generate, the more momentum we'll create. So, I am from the great state of Colorado. Go Broncos. Yeah, that's right. I said it. I'm a crazy man. Maybe. And at the risk of confirming certain stereotypes about my lovely state, the example I always love to go to on this is marijuana legalization. Now, here is an issue that 20 years ago, if people had said, it'll be legal in 5 states, 20 years from now, people would have looked at you like you were high. But by picking these smart local battles, by using the ballot initiative process, not only have legalization advocates been able to begin to turn policies in cities and states, but they've also moved the needle nationally. And I think that's a playbook that you're seeing our movement begin to emulate more and more, and it's paying off in tremendous ways. And then the other thing, we really want to focus on is the importance of grassroots organizing. We have 40 chapters across the country. Every Voice has done tremendous work getting people organized. Constitutional amendment groups like Free Speech for People, like like Wolfpack, like all these different groups have been doing great work to get folks organized, and it has, a really huge impact because these are the people that are showing up in those city council meetings, at those state legislatures, getting the signatures for these ballot initiatives and really making the change. And by staying organized and building this national infrastructure of our movement, it also makes it possible for us to defend the wins down the line because, passing these laws is only half the battle. We are taking on some very rich and very powerful people who kind of have a sweet thing going right now. And they will not go quietly, and we need to be there to protect these wins after we've got them. And then the only other thing I want to add before I stop babbling is, how genuinely nonpartisan, this movement is becoming. I think, a lot of times when, everyone involved with politics likes to say this is a nonpartisan issue, this is a nonpartisan issue, to the point where it's almost become, I think it's become deprived of its power in certain points, but I think that, when you look at the kinds of coalitions that are coming together to support these reforms, it's truly remarkable. When we went to fight for our first Anti-Corruption Act in Tallahassee, there's something really powerful about seeing the chairman of the local Common Cause chapter and the chair of the local Tea Party network sit down together and go on a local right-wing talk radio show and all agree on all of the policies we've been talking about here today. I think the more and more, give it up. And I think that's something that we're going to see more and more because, the only people who disagree with this right now are the people getting rich off the current system. And frankly, there are more of us than there are of them. So I'm really, really excited to see, what the next year brings. As Karen was saying, there's going to be initiatives moving in 5 states, countless cities. The movement for the amendment continues to pick up steam. And this is a very, very exciting time to be part of this movement because, really we are just getting started. Thank you.
Thank you, Mansur. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I'm Nick Nyhart. I'm the head of Every Voice Center, a national organization that works for every voice to be heard in politics. I want to thank all of you here, folks of the New Hampshire Rebellion, for pulling this together. John, you talked about being the godfather of reform in New Hampshire. People here in New Hampshire should know that John has been a tremendous leader on the national scene as well. And I just want to ask, how many people in this room have marched in one of the New Hampshire Rebellion marches at some point? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, so it looks like about half the room, maybe a little more than that, has been part of that. But that's walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And I was up here in some of those cold days to do it with you, and I'm just amazed at the number of people who stood up here, when it was snowing and 10 degrees, to stand up for campaign finance reform was great and has brought us here to this day. Karen, thanks for leading off with that report that was put together by Common Cause and Every Voice and national organizations, just pooling together and cataloging the progress that's being made and all the activity around the country. We don't have to convince people anymore in this country that we have a money and politics problem. Thank you. That job is done. Thank you, Charles and David Koch, and a cast of literally dozens for making sure we know we have a billionaire-driven political system right now. I think our job is not to talk about the problem so much anymore, but to make solutions part of the debate, a much bigger part of the debate, and to win victories that make a difference and inspire more people to join all of us here in this tent in furthering progress and being activists. I want to drill down on the small donor-based reform policies, which have been mentioned a little bit here, because we believe they're the greatest game changers, especially, as Jeff has talked about, when accompanied by overturning Citizens United and similar cases so wrongly decided by the Roberts Court by just one vote. These systems of small donor-based public financing are game changers because they turn the current system on its head. Instead of candidates being dependent on very small numbers of people for very large amounts of money, they rely on lots and lots of people giving small amounts of money. And it means that every voice is heard, not just the people who write the biggest checks. And when every voice is heard, we're much more likely to get policies that reflect the will and interest of the many rather than the will and the interest of the money. on issues from taxes to healthcare, to energy policy, to criminal justice, to our paychecks. There are a variety of ways to write these laws, but they're basically similar in that they allow candidates to run for office and win seeking small donations that are then augmented by a limited but sufficient amount of public funding. So it's not rocket science, and sometimes these laws are made up to be very complicated, and they're written and they take pages and pages, but in their essence, they're really very simple. The first step is that candidates demonstrate they meet a threshold level of support from ordinary people in their districts, a set amount of money in small donations. Candidates then agree to sharp restrictions on taking large private contributions, and in return they become eligible to receive public funds for their campaigns. So it's really quite simple, but different places have done this slightly different ways. So in Maine, for example, candidates gather lots of $5 contributions and get a flat grant of campaign cash, enough to win a typical race. In New York City, they have a system based on matching small donations, small contributions 6-to-1. So if you give a candidate who's qualified for the system $25, they get another $150 in public financing and public matching funds. And these candidates have to agree to spending limits. And there's a brand new honest election system in Seattle which goes into effect in less than a year. It's a real breakthrough. There, voters in Seattle will get $100 each in democracy vouchers, 4 $25 coupons, really, that they can give to a candidate who's qualified and has agreed to give up large private contributions. They only can take another $100 in private contributions from any single individual. They can turn in these vouchers for real campaign cash. So incentivizes them to talk to lots more people rather than spending time begging for big money. So at the federal level, there's similar laws that are being offered right now, like the Government by the People Act. John Sarbanes will be here later to talk about that, and the Fair Election Bill, the Fair Elections Bill in the Senate. They all include components of these state and city models. The systems make everyday people much more important in politics, and big money count for far less. So the voters in this country desperately want this kind of change on both sides of the aisle, whether you're a conservative, a liberal, a Republican, a Democrat, or somewhere in between or something else. This is popular. So I'm going to quote you some polling numbers in a minute, but first listen to these members. Karen mentioned that less than 100 days ago, voters in Maine and Seattle brought in new campaign finance systems. In Maine, they strengthened their clean election system, undoing some of the damage the Supreme Court created by a 55 to 45% margin. That's a pretty clear majority. In Seattle, the vote for the honest election system was more than 2-to-1. So these are landslides when you let the people speak up. That's why, Mansur, when you talked about letting the people have their say, it really can turn things around. And here today, we need look no further than the presidential race and Tuesday's vote in both parties to see the anger and the discontent that Americans feel to the current political system. On Tuesday and Wednesday, Every Voice polled Democratic caucus goers in Iowa, so this is right after they'd voted, and 64% of them said a candidate's stand on money in politics was one of the top 3 reasons that they voted for who they did, and 25% said it was their single biggest reason for deciding who to vote for in that election. And outsider candidates have been the story of this race so far, upending establishment thinking and the conventional wisdom. So Jeff and Mansur and Karen have all talked about remarkable progress around the country as we're seeing people stand up to take our country back. Looking ahead, there are more small donor victories on the drawing boards. We're working together, all of us, with activists from Florida to Arizona, from Idaho to Arkansas. There's more to come from Washington State, South Dakota, counties in Maryland, the city of Chicago, the city of Los Angeles, and other places as well. Here in New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Rebellion has made money in politics a much more visible issue and has mobilized thousands of grassroots activists like you over the past 2 years. After Tuesday, that fight needs to continue, whether it's to push the political establishment in Washington to pass the Sarbanes Government by the People Act, to win a New Hampshire homegrown model of small donor public financing, to keep pressing for a constitutional amendment, or to expose the billionaire's secret money. And I know all of you in this tent will be in one way or another taking up that call. will. But what's more, I know that together we can win. We can win these fights. So I grew up in New England, and I think anybody who grew up in New England, Jeff, you talked about the Concord Bridge. So you grow up, and as part of it gets infused into your system, reading about the Patriots during the Revolutionary War. And I read every book I could on the American Revolution, who threw off British imperial rule because they didn't want the king thousands of miles away making decisions for them that they should make themselves. And stories like this reverberate, and they won that against a huge imperial power. And stories like that reverberate across American history. Justice overcoming injustice, always moving towards a more perfect union, no taxation without representation, the abolition of slavery, the right to vote for women, civil rights, marriage equality. We win progress against the odds. The big banks, the energy companies, and the other industries and special interests act right now as if they own Washington and the state capitals. But our history tells us that David can beat Goliath. We know all of us together can beat back the billionaires who are taking away our democracy. Powerful opponents won't stop us because we bring our best when we're faced with their worst. And so it is with money in politics. So I look forward to continuing this fight with you. We're going to win. And thank you, New Hampshire Rebellion, for having us up here.
Well, you've heard from the experts and those that are leading the fight for real reform. Let's open it up. Fire away. Who's got the first question? Please. Dan, we got somebody that can hand the mic out? Okay, we got somebody. Volunteerism.
Hello. I've got a concern, actually a couple. And I thank you all and support you in the work you're doing. But Congress has no incentive to really move forward on this. They have huge incentive to sidetrack this effort in any way they can. And they've been very successful. I was involved in 2000 when Granny D and others raised this issue. So what happened? We passed the McCain-Feingold law, and we knocked corporate soft money out. It was 17% of the total. 98% of us didn't give a dime directly to any federal candidate or political party, and the real underlying problem is that it's tipping legislation toward the interests of the 2%. So it knocked 17% out, but it left us looking for money from that 2%, which came
sir,
in.
I don't want to be rude, but let's focus your question.
This is important, so I need to ask you to bear with me. So fast forward to now, if we pass Citizens United, and it has the language that Jeff spoke of, there's a danger. And the danger is that Congress will do only what is in its interest. What's in its interest is to knock the dark money out of the progress, because every senator...
Sir, excuse me. What we're looking for is a question. You made your point, and it's an important point, but
I think I got the question, John.
All right, I'll pose the question.
Please.
But it can be sidetracked, and there needs to be a strategy that, if Congress sidetracks it, goes beyond it. I'd really like your thoughts on how you avoid the sidetracking and how we get a good strategy to get comprehensive change, as Nick was mentioning, because we have to get back to the 98% and change it that way.
Great question. Fire away. Who's on?
I'll jump in first since you mentioned the amendment. You know, I think what we're doing here is not McCain-Feingold. That is past. We are way past where we were in the 90s in both the problem, but far more important, in the solution. I don't think anyone here, and stand up if you feel differently, but maybe I will let John decide who should stand up, but thinks that Congress is, that we sit back and wait for Congress to fix this. We will have a very different Congress when we continue to do the kind of things that Karen talked about, Nick talked about, Mansur talked about, and do the constitutional amendment. We're not talking about, you know, going hat in hand to Congress and asking them nicely to do something. We're talking about changing history. And American history, when we're at our best, doesn't go backwards. Amendment work drives everything else. All this work, this is a movement, and it changes it, and Congress looks differently when we do that. So
Thank
that's
you, Jeff.
why I think we can do this.
Thank you. Who else has got a question? I see one right over here. There's the mic.
I'm Bill McGoy from Minnesota. I'm one of the candidates in the Democratic presidential primary on Tuesday. My question really has to do with access to the voters. Why is there no focus upon the necessity, I think, of making free airtime available to candidates? The assumption is that you have to raise a lot of money to pay for the airtime, but the airtime belongs to the people. Why is there no focus upon a system of allowing candidates to address the public without the need to raise large sums of money?
So I sense your question is, what about free airtime mandated by congressional law? Nick?
So I think it could be part of a solution, certainly. Campaigns spend a lot of money on a lot of other things, and increasingly, paid broadcast time is becoming a smaller and smaller part of the pie as people communicate through all sorts of means. So we think that providing public funds that lets the candidate decide where they spend it is the biggest solution. As part of that, though, you could have some offering of free airtime and have the network essentially cough some money up. That's also a hard fight to take on the broadcast industry. So we mainly want to give candidates the funding and then have them decide how much to spend on internet advertising, how much to spend on broadcast advertising, and so on. But I think you're right to say you've got to do something to give them the means to get on TV.
Next question, please. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Joe Magruder, proud member of the Rebellion. My question is, and this scene right here sort of illustrates it. There's so many groups with so many solutions, and I think the great mass of voters out there look at the situation and they still see fragmentation, and why don't we have like one really focused collection of solutions?
Yep. Can folks hear me? One of the remarkable things, and I will say, Common Cause that works on a number of different issues supports all of the reforms that we've outlined. And we have seen over the past a number of groups crop up that will talk about a single issue. But I think since Citizens United, we have seen remarkable unity where groups are coming together and just this past year have signed a unity statement talking about that the solutions must involve small donor public financing, overturning Citizens United, ensuring meaningful contribution limits, that there is strong disclosure and transparency, that we have to make sure that there is strong enforcement of anything that's passed, so that we, replace the FEC, or at the state level there has to be strong enforcement, or people will violate the rules with impunity. And so what we have found, and also that there are a number of other measures that you can do, and this is something we found when we enacted public financing in Connecticut. If we didn't have strong enforcement, the system would be gone. If we didn't ratchet down the loopholes on the outside, people wouldn't have participated in the public financing system. So the truth is, we need all of those things, and people have come together to recognize that and work together in ways that we didn't see 5 or 10 years ago. So I think we've made real progress on that. Different groups will talk about different things, but there's a remarkable amount of working together on these, and even making sure that as people are moving different ballot initiatives in different states, that we're talking together about how we do it. We are creating criteria to make sure that we're doing it in the best way possible. I think that's a snapshot of 10 years ago and not where we are today.
I would just add, as head of one of the national reform organizations, I agree completely, Karen. We worked together beautifully, but each brings different strengths to the battle. I think if we were one organization, we would not be able to build on the various strengths that are brought. But your point is dead right, and it's vital that we continue, and we will. We know each other well, and we coordinate well. Let there be no doubt. Next question, please.
I have a question, if I may.
Sorry, since you got the mic, you're in control.
Thank you, if you don't mind.
It's a democracy. Let's take a vote. Should he get it? Go ahead.
I might take a turn.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Peter White. I'm also with the New Hampshire Independent Voters. And something else we're doing is going to every candidate for state and federal office to ask them to sign a pledge to refuse PAC money and walk the walk for campaign finance reform.
Is that a question?
Well, my question to you is why can't we do this in every state in the country, start this anti-PAC campaign so we can turn PAC contributions from an asset to a liability? My second question is Maggie Hassan is thinking about signing this anti-PAC pledge. So if everybody here in New Hampshire can call her office Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, ask her to sign the pledge.
We're going to keep politics out of this. We're going to keep politics.
Refuse PAC money. She might sign it. She might be one of our leaders in this movement. So why can't we do this nationally?
Who wants to take it?
Well,
So, I have just a quick question. Are you talking about discouraging super PAC outside spending, or are you talking just about political action committees that give campaign contributions?
This is focused on political action committees because no matter who they are, a PAC contribution is a legal bribe. So we were trying to turn PACs into a liability and eventually get them out of existence by candidates for office refusing to take them because it'll make them look like they're corrupt.
I think you put a position on the table. Let's go to the next question. Who's out there? Here we go. Right here, please. Fire away.
I'm Jeff Stutzman. So, different type of a question. So I'm going to just state right up front, I'm absolutely for the small donor and removal of the big money, but I have to ask the question has there been any consideration for the economic impact of some of these things? For example, companies lobby for contracts. Contracts create jobs, like BAE, like the supporting infrastructure around the area, the pizza place that serves pizzas. What's the economic impact of the removal of the big money from the...
Jeff, did you want to?
Yeah, could I just touch on that? And others may want to weigh in too. Just very briefly, I'd commend to you a paper by Professor John Coates at Harvard Law School. He's on our legal advisory committee at Free Speech for People. He makes the point that the worst thing we can do for our economy is have a crony capitalism, money-dominated political system. He calls it the problem of Russia. He says oligarchy is not good for the economy. Pay-to-play politics is not good for the economy. Most jobs are created by small businesses. They don't have the lobbies in Washington that you're talking about. And so I think he makes the argument, and I would too, but if you want a grounded, Harvard law professor of corporate law argument, he's adamantly with us on this. He's very concerned about the economic impacts of when you don't have a flourishing democracy with everyone engaged. It's actually good democracy and good economy goes together.
Mansur, I saw you nodding your head. Did you want to comment?
I was just agreeing.
Huh?
I was just agreeing with him.
Okay, next question.
Check the paper. I'll send it to you.
Yes, please, ma'am. Ma'am, right here. We have a mic. Hey, you're wonderful. Thank you, volunteer.
Thank you. I'm Ilse Andrews from Exeter. Is it on?
Yeah.
Good.
It's on.
I have a question of possible massive backlash from all the great victories that you have mentioned. Has it been a question where, for example, in Connecticut, you have to be extremely watchful that the former money givers have simply gone underground?
That's a fascinating question.
Yeah. And it's interesting. The backlash when we first passed this was actually they sued us. So they sued the law, and we had to protect it. And as people know, small donor public financing is constitutional. There is an effort, and it's important to remain vigilant. I will be honest. We enacted fixes and remained vigilant. We passed it in 2005. We did fixes in 2006, 2007. Democracy is not something you enact something and then you walk away. There are a number of coalition partners that monitor and make sure, and we strengthen and work to protect it. And there will be efforts to try and go around it. The Citizens or the Arizona Free Enterprise ruling knocked down one piece of it, and we're working to fix that. That is just part of what I believe democracy is about. And we have a stronger coalition now than when we passed it in 2005.
We've got time for one more.
All right.
I was going to add, in every small donor public financing victory we've won, the opposition, whether through the courts or through politics, started the next day to try and take it away. So if there's one lesson is you need permanent organizations ready to stand up for democracy, because you have permanent forces trying to take it away from you.
Thanks. One more question, just what time for it? Here we go.
So, James Madison, 4th President of the United States. I am currently a resident of Massachusetts. And in Massachusetts, of course, we have a bill in legislature right now to clarify that within Massachusetts, corporations are not people and money is not speech, which is a great idea. And of course, people are talking about the legality of all of this, whether a state can make a declaration. But my question really is, the Supreme Court gets to do whatever it wants. In the case of the 401c5, the Supreme Court declared that the totality of money means 50%. And that's why 401(c)(3)(4s can...
Excuse me, sir. Would you get to your question?
And so the question is...
Thank you.
If the Supreme Court gets to redefine words, how do we deal with that? They just redefine the language.
Who would like to answer that?
Well, I'll jump in. So the Supreme Court is always it's one of the three branches, and very important, of course, but it's only one of three branches. And the way we deal with that is the way we have always dealt with that in America. Mr. Madison, thank you for putting in Article 3 about the Supreme Court, and especially for putting in Article 5 of the Constitution, which reminds the court that it's the people who are sovereign. 7 times we have overturned Supreme Court decisions in our history. Let's make it number 8 with Citizens United.
Woo! Thank you all. Thank you for a terrific panel. Now, the 5 of us met a few minutes ago, and the panelists said, well, it's okay if the moderator gives his perspective at the end. So recognize I'm now a panelist, not this powerful moderator.
I think John deserves a big round of applause.
Yeah. Thank you, John.
I believe deeply that we need to accomplish the reforms that the panels put on the table. Disclosure, FEC reform, overturning Citizens United. But I believe that there's one reform that is absolutely vital for this nation also, and that is some form of public funding elections. And I think Nick put the best form at the present time on the table, which is the small donor match. Why do I believe that? I believe it for the reasons that have been mentioned, most particularly by Nick, because it's a way for everyone to have their voice count, not just those with money. But for me, why I wake up in the morning and work on this is because I believe with a voluntary, and the court says it must be voluntary, system of public financing at the federal level, Congress and the White House, we will attract over time, I may not be alive to see it, we will attract over time the quality of candidates and elected officials we need to meet the magnitude of challenges that this nation faces. When I ran against Judd Gregg in 1992 and got inside the political system, I could sense a decline in the quality on both sides of the aisle. It won't work. It will not work. We must get to a system where we can attract to high office the very finest leaders that we have in this nation. And if you question public funding, what I'd suggest you do is you drive home. Think about this nation. Think about this democracy with the current system of financing elections. I suggest this democracy will not be vital. The nation will be in serious trouble. So I agree we must go with all the reforms that relate and are important to it. But there is a vital must, and that is that we get to some system, small donor public at the matching system at this point, of public funding of elections.
Thank you, John.
Thank you all for being with us. Thanks to Dan and the team in New Hampshire Rebellion, and thanks to the panel. Great job, guys. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mansur. Thanks so much, Jeff. Do look up Jeff Clements' book at the back. There's a table of books. Thank you, Nick and Karen, so much. Thank you, John.